When cartoons go too far, they stop being entertainment and start becoming forbidden history. The 1,980 seconds may be remembered for arcade games, neon lights, and blockbuster hits. But behind the bright colors was an underground world of animated films that were anything but safe. Some were pulled from theaters, others were chopped into pieces, and a few disappeared completely. Were these movies really that dangerous, or just too bold for their time? What follows might just change how you see the decade. The Secret of NIMH, 1982. On the surface, Don Bluth's The Secret of NIMH looks like a traditional animated fantasy. A brave mouse, a magical amulet, and a fight for survival. But once audiences sat down, they realized this wasn't Disney. It was something darker, stranger, and far more unsettling. The movie told the story of Mrs. Brisby, a widowed field mouse trying to save her sick child. But instead of cheerful songs and playful sidekicks, viewers got eerie science experiments, nightmarish owls, and scenes filled with shadow and dread. Parents expecting a safe children's adventure left theaters in shock, wondering why their little ones had just witnessed an animated meditation on cruelty, survival, and death. Censors around the world didn't take kindly either. In the United Kingdom, the movie was trimmed for television screenings, with violent moments cut down to avoid traumatizing children. In some American schools, teachers who showed the film as part of Literature Week quickly faced complaints from outraged parents. Critics at the time noted that the film blurred the line between family-friendly fantasy and adult storytelling, daring to show scenes of blood, peril, and grim themes in ways that mainstream animation simply avoided. Yet that same controversy gave it life. Word spread that The Secret of NIMH was the dark alternative to Disney's safer productions. Teens and adults who thought they'd outgrown cartoons sought it out, treating it like a secret handshake of animation fandom. Don Bluth, who had left Disney to make it, earned a reputation as the rebel animator of the decade, the one who proved cartoons didn't need to be sugar-coated. Today, The Secret of NIMH is remembered as both terrifying and brilliant, a movie that broke rules and carved a path for more daring animation. The bans and edits only made it more legendary. Sometimes being too scary for children is exactly what makes a story timeless. Fire and Ice, 1983. Imagine Ralph Bakshi teaming up with fantasy artist Frank Frazetta. What you get is Fire and Ice, a sword and sorcery epic that looked like a moving comic book and came loaded with controversy. At first glance, it seemed like a straightforward battle between good and evil, but the style and tone, way too intense for some audiences. The story followed a young warrior named Larn, a sinister sorcerer who controlled glaciers, and a princess caught in the middle. Unlike most animated films of its time, Fire and Ice was deliberately raw, gritty, and packed with non-stop danger. Every frame carried the Frazetta touch, larger-than-life characters, sprawling battles, and landscapes that looked like they came straight off the cover of a fantasy novel. But that same artistry sparked backlash. Parents who took their kids expecting another fairy tale were horrified at the constant fighting, terrifying creatures, and a tone drenched in menace. The action scenes were intense, and the visuals had a rough, exaggerated energy that critics said felt more like an adult comic brought to life than a safe animated adventure. Several broadcasters in Europe flat out refused to air the movie, calling it inappropriate for television. In the United States, it slipped into late-night screenings, where its reputation as too much for kids only grew stronger. Censorship boards weren't sure what to make of it. Was it an animated movie for teens? Adults? Nobody could quite decide, and so the safest answer was to cut it, shelve it, or bury it. Ironically, that decision only fueled curiosity. For fans of fantasy art, Fire and Ice became a cult favorite, a film that dared to show animation as something raw, powerful, and untamed. Looking back, Fire and Ice stands as a warning and a promise. The warning? Don't underestimate how much an animated movie can shock parents. The promise? Animation doesn't have to play by family-friendly rules to leave a mark. And in the case of Fire and Ice, the controversy ensured it would never be forgotten. Rock and Rule, 1983. What happens when you take a gritty rock opera, fill it with animated mutants, and bring in music legends like Debbie Harry and Lou Reed? You get Rock and Rule, a movie that aimed high but ended up pulled from screens, banned in markets, and nearly forgotten. This Canadian-American production told the story of a futuristic world where animals evolved into human-like forms after a disaster. The villain, Mock, is a power-hungry musician who wants to summon a destructive force using music itself. It's part sci-fi, part fantasy, and part surreal concert film. On paper, it sounded like the ultimate crossover between cartoons and rock culture. But once the film hit theaters, parents were outraged. The tone was dark, the characters seductive, and the imagery carried an apocalyptic vibe that shocked audiences expecting something lighter. In the United States, censors zeroed in on its intense visuals and edgy themes, labeling it too disturbing for children. Several broadcasters refused to touch it, fearing complaints. In the United Kingdom, the movie faced restrictions and was difficult to find for years. Some countries went further, banning it outright because of its portrayal of chaos, destruction, and what officials claimed were satanic overtones. Ironically, its troubled release doomed its box office chances, but guaranteed it a cult reputation. Teens who stumbled upon VHS copies in the late 1980s treated it like contraband, proof that not all animation was made for kids. Rock and Rule's controversy also sparked debates in the industry. Could animation tackle music, rebellion, and adult themes without facing the chopping block? The answer seemed to be no, at least not in the 80s. Decades later, the movie is celebrated for its bold ambition. What was once banned as too dark now stands as a pioneering work that pushed American animation far outside its comfort zone. Starchaser, The Legend of Orin, 1985. In the wake of Star Wars mania, countless studios tried to cash in with their own space operas. One of the strangest and most controversial was Starchaser, The Legend of Orin, an animated sci-fi adventure that promised dazzling visuals but delivered plenty of backlash. Released in 1985, it was one of the first animated features created in 3D. Audiences were given glasses and sent into a world of intergalactic battles, laser duels, and heroic escapes. At first, it seemed like harmless sci-fi fun. But censors and parents quickly disagreed. The movie's action sequences were shockingly intense for a cartoon. Villains tortured slaves, battles were violent, and the tone was far too grim for children. Critics accused it of ripping off Star Wars while drenching the story in moments that bordered on frightening. In some countries, distributors refused to show it in theaters, while in others, entire scenes were cut down to soften the danger. Even in the United States, it was quietly buried after its short run, with very little promotion. Despite its struggles, Starchaser built a following among sci-fi fans who admired its ambition. The early 3D effects were clunky but groundbreaking, and the movie dared to explore darker territory than most animated films of the era. But it was that same ambition, mixing futuristic visuals with raw peril, that got it labeled inappropriate by networks and censors. Today, Starchaser lives on as a cult curiosity. It's remembered less for its box office numbers and more for the controversy that surrounded it. Too violent for kids, too strange for adults, and too risky for theaters, it became a film that slipped through the cracks of the 80s but not without leaving its mark. The Chipmunk Adventure, 1987. You wouldn't expect Alvin and the Chipmunks to make a banned movie list, but in 1987, The Chipmunk Adventure shocked more than a few parents. Marketed as a safe family cartoon, it ended up causing so much backlash that it was restricted in several regions and criticized heavily in the United States. The plot seemed innocent. Alvin, Simon, and Theodore take part in a hot air balloon race around the world, competing against the Chipettes. But instead of just songs and laughs, audiences were treated to kidnappings, dangerous chases, and villains who looked more like Bond adversaries than Saturday morning cartoon baddies. Children who adored the TV series suddenly found themselves watching their favorite characters threatened, trapped, and manipulated in ways that felt far too intense. Parents weren't amused. Complaints poured in that the film was too frightening for its target audience. In some international markets, distributors pulled it from theaters, saying the imagery and themes weren't appropriate for younger viewers. Even in the United States, critics debated whether the film had crossed a line, with some arguing that its tone was closer to a thriller than a harmless sing-along. What made the backlash stronger was the contrast. The chipmunks were supposed to be symbols of lighthearted fun, yet here they were, caught up in a story filled with danger and menace. That clash left many viewers unsettled. Over time, the movie gained a strange reputation. Kids who saw it adored. Theaters remembered it vividly, sometimes more like a scary adventure than a musical romp. Meanwhile, collectors and animation fans kept it alive as a cult curiosity, a reminder that even the most wholesome franchises can stumble into controversy. The Chipmunk Adventure stands today as proof that you don't need shocking imagery to cause bans. Sometimes all it takes is giving kids a little too much peril, and suddenly your lighthearted cartoon becomes a movie parents don't want anywhere near their living room. Felix the Cat, the movie, 1988. Felix the Cat had been a household name since the silent era, a cheerful mascot whose face was plastered on everything from clocks to lunchboxes. But in 1988, when Felix finally starred in a feature-length animated movie, things took a shocking turn. What was supposed to be a triumphant comeback ended in controversy, bans, and a bruised legacy. The film followed Felix on a surreal adventure into a strange, dystopian kingdom. The imagery was darker than expected, filled with eerie landscapes, grotesque villains, and bizarre sequences that left young audiences unsettled. Parents who took their kids expecting the same lighthearted Felix from decades earlier were stunned by what they saw. The pacing was uneven, the tone frightening, and the humor far edgier than Saturday morning cartoons. The backlash was immediate. In the United States, the movie struggled to find a wide release, with many theaters pulling it after negative reactions. Television broadcasters overseas, especially in Europe, banned or heavily edited it, arguing that it was marketed dishonestly as family entertainment. Instead of a safe, kid-friendly romp, they saw it as an experiment gone wrong, too scary, too strange, and too disturbing for its intended audience. Critics piled on, calling it a bizarre misfire that ruined Felix's reputation. Audiences, confused by its jarring tone, avoided it in droves. The movie disappeared quickly, only resurfacing years later on VHS, where it developed a cult following among those curious about its troubled history. For longtime fans, Felix the Cat, the movie is remembered not for its charm, but for its shock value. It proved that even the most beloved icons can stumble when studios take creative risks that cross the line. And sometimes, those risks get a film banned before it ever has the chance to recover. Allegro non troppo, 1982. Italy may have produced it, but the controversy around Allegro non troppo erupted in the United States during its 1982 release. The film was pitched as a satirical answer to Disney's Fantasia, combining classical music with surreal animated segments. But instead of magical brooms or dancing hippos, Allegro non troppo served up imagery that was bizarre, unsettling, and often darkly comic. For American distributors, this was a headache waiting to happen. The animation included sequences that poked fun at consumer culture, human cruelty, and even the march of time itself. Some scenes leaned into unsettling territory, like animals suffering or characters dissolving into surreal chaos. Parents who took their children expecting Italy's Fantasia stormed out of theaters, furious that they'd been misled. Television networks in the United States debated whether to air it at all. When they did, whole sequences were trimmed or removed, stripping away much of the film's bite. Abroad, it was even harsher. Certain countries blocked it from distribution altogether, citing offensive imagery. The ban cemented Allegro non troppo's reputation as the weird European cartoon that America didn't quite know what to do with. But the controversy only helped its cult status. College students, art house fans, and those hungry for something different traded copies, passing it along as the forbidden Fantasia. For many, watching it felt like breaking a rule. Today, Allegro non troppo is hailed as a masterpiece of experimental animation, but in the early 80s, its U.S. and release proved one thing: Sometimes audiences aren't ready for cartoons that look like family fare but hit with adult-level strangeness. Rock Odyssey, 1982. Imagine Hanna-Barbera, the studio behind Scooby-Doo and the Flintstones, suddenly trying to make an animated rock opera about the chaos of American life. That's exactly what happened with Rock Odyssey, a film so strange and intense that it never saw a proper release in the United States during the 1980s. The movie was designed to chronicle American pop culture from the 1950s through the 70s, using music and surreal animated vignettes. But instead of the lighthearted fun Hanna-Barbera was famous for, Rock Odyssey turned out trippy, dark, and often frightening. Its characters wandered through violent riots, cultural upheaval, and bizarre dreamlike sequences that shocked test audiences. Executives panicked. They worried it would tarnish the studio's safe, kid-friendly brand. Television networks that previewed the movie flat out refused to broadcast it, citing disturbing imagery and tone. Abroad, it faced bans or indefinite shelving for similar reasons. For years, the film was locked away, whispered about as the Hanna-Barbera cartoon you'll never see. Ironically, the ban only made Rock Odyssey more desirable. Bootleg VHS tapes circulated among collectors, and word of its surreal animation spread through fanzines and conventions. Those who saw it described it as half music video, half nightmare, unlike anything the studio had ever produced. It wasn't until decades later that Rock Odyssey resurfaced in limited form, finally proving that yes, Hanna-Barbera really did make something that wild. In the end, the decision to bury it showed how even the most mainstream studios can create something so controversial that it terrifies their own executives more than the public. All Dogs Go to Heaven, 1989. When you hear the title All Dogs Go to Heaven, you probably picture a sweet family movie. But when it hit theaters in 1989, parents quickly realized this wasn't the cuddly cartoon they expected. It was one of the darkest mainstream animated films of the decade. The story followed Charlie, a dog who cheats death, returns to Earth, and struggles with greed, redemption, and friendship. On paper, it sounded heartwarming. On screen, it was filled with intense chases, sinister villains, and emotional moments that left children sobbing in theaters. Don Bluth, the animator who had already pushed boundaries with The Secret of NIMH and The Land Before Time, once again refused to sugarcoat his storytelling. Parents were outraged. Scenes of gambling, drinking, and life-and-death stakes were unlike anything audiences associated with family animation. Complaints poured in about traumatized children, and in some regions the film was slapped with restrictions or removed from school libraries. In the United Kingdom, broadcasters hesitated to air it for years, worried that the darker moments were too much for television audiences. The backlash echoed through critics' reviews as well. Some praised Bluth for creating a daring story that treated kids with respect, while others accused the film of crossing the line into nightmare fuel. For every viewer who admired its artistry, there was another who called it inappropriate. Ironically, the very things that got it censored made it unforgettable. Children who watched it still talk about how deeply it shook them, while fans of animation hail it as one of Bluth's most ambitious works. All Dogs Go to Heaven proved that even films aimed at young audiences could spark bans, complaints, and heated debates. It wasn't just a cartoon, it was a reminder that the 1980s were a decade where animated movies weren't afraid to go places. Parents never ate. Expected. G.I. Joe, the movie, 1987. By the mid-80s, G.I. Joe wasn't just a toy line, it was an empire. The cartoon series was already a hit with kids, so a full-length animated movie seemed like a no-brainer. But when G.I. Joe, the movie finally arrived in 1987, it triggered so much backlash that it was pulled from theaters in some places and heavily restricted elsewhere. The controversy centered on one thing: the intensity. Unlike the TV show, which always wrapped up its battles with a safe message, the movie took a darker route. The story introduced Cobra La, a bizarre race of ancient beings, and threw the Joes into one of their most perilous adventures yet. The action was non-stop, the stakes were higher, and one shocking moment nearly changed cartoon history. Originally, the film was supposed to kill off Duke, one of the franchise's most beloved characters. Early test audiences erupted in horror when they saw him struck down, fearing the movie had just traumatized an entire generation. The backlash was so fierce that Hasbro demanded changes. Instead of dying, Duke was suddenly in a coma, with an awkwardly dubbed line saving him at the last minute. But the damage was done. The movie had already earned a reputation as too harsh for children. Censors weren't kind either. Some international markets pulled it from theaters, while others slashed scenes of intense fighting. In the United States, the release strategy was scaled back, moving straight to television in many areas. Fans who finally saw it often whispered that this was the too dark chapter of G.I. Joe. Ironically, the controversy only cemented its legend. Kids traded stories on playgrounds, VHS copies circulated, and Duke's near death became part of franchise lore. G.I. Joe. The movie may have scared executives, but it proved that even toy-based cartoons could cross the line into dangerous territory. Transformers, the movie, 1986. If you grew up in the 80s, chances are you've heard about the shockwave caused by Transformers, the movie. Released in 1986, it wasn't just a tie-in for Hasbro toys, it was a full-blown animated epic. But instead of being remembered for its flashy robots and booming soundtrack, it went down in history for one of the most traumatic moments in cartoon cinema. The story followed the Autobots and Decepticons in an all-out war that introduced a terrifying new villain, Unicron, a planet-sized machine bent on destruction. With Orson Welles voicing Unicron and Leonard Nimoy lending his voice to Galvatron, it had serious star power. But what nobody expected was how ruthless the film would be toward its own heroes. Within the first act, beloved characters were destroyed in brutal fashion. The biggest blow? Optimus Prime's shocking death. For children who had tuned in for years of Saturday morning battles where no one ever truly lost, this was earth-shattering. Parents flooded theaters and toy companies with complaints, saying the movie had crossed the line from action-packed fun into psychological trauma. Censors around the world scrambled. Some television broadcasts cut down the body count. Others avoided airing the movie entirely, fearing backlash from parents. In the United Kingdom, restrictions limited its release, and in some countries, it was quietly shelved. But just like with G.I. Joe, the controversy only made Transformers, the movie, legendary. Kids who had witnessed Optimus Prime's fall never forgot it, and collectors hunted down VHS copies, determined to relive the forbidden cartoon moment. Even today, fans talk about the exact second they cried in the theater, clutching popcorn while watching their hero fade away. What was supposed to be a flashy toy commercial ended up as one of the most controversial animated films of the 1980s. And for many, it proved that cartoons could hit harder than any live-action drama. So there you have it, 13 animated films from the 1980s that didn't just push boundaries, they crashed right through them. Some were banned, others were censored, and a few vanished before they ever had a chance to find their audience. But here's the twist. Every cut, every ban, and every controversy only made them more unforgettable. Which of these movies have you seen, and which do you dare to watch now? Drop your thoughts below, hit subscribe, and keep the conversation alive.